A peat-filled bog north of Yarmouth and Northwich in the Midlands is home to an evil temple of ancient power and possibly the deepest dungeon in all of Havenland. My Dungeon 23 challenge is underway, and this is week 1, coming right up on RPG Retro Reviews. Hello everyone, I'm Captain Courageous and I review old school modules and games and try to give them a fun and informative analysis. This week I'm discussing my Dungeon 23 challenge project. Those not in the know, this originates from a tweet from Sean McKay, game designer and author of the Mothership RPG, where he suggests creating a one-room-a-day dungeon, 12 levels and thus 365 rooms, keeping it all in a journal, so at the end of the year you'll have a complete mega dungeon. I first got turned on to this by Ben over at Questing Beast, thanks Ben, and immediately smitten with the idea. Having just finished my review of the Midlands Expanded, I was looking to play around a bit with the setting and the Swords and Wizardry RPG, and this gave me the perfect excuse. Before I go over the first week's progress, let me review a few of the design elements I have in mind for the thing. While Sean McKay suggests using a journal, I'm going to deviate from that and use my OpenOffice software. I can just type faster and my handwriting isn't that great. My goal at the end is to have a really nice PDF that I can print out and put in a binder with plastic sheet protectors. I will, however, be hand drawing the map. I have all the art supplies I need for a nice looking, old school Dyson Logos inspired type dungeon design, which you can see here. Afterwards, I can scan it, clean it up a bit, and add a little sepia, and have a nice map to go with everything as well. Of course, I'll be providing update videos occasionally like this one all year, and patrons will get a PDF each time with my progress, further adding to my motivation to keep this going. Also, before I begin, let me take a moment to mention that Super Thanks is now active on the channel. If you'd like to send a tip and help support the production of videos like this one, thank you in advance. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the background of this thing and the completed rooms from week 1. About 500 years ago, a small cult of worshippers dedicated to the great Leviathan, Orth Cthulhu, sprang up, fervent in the belief that the beast would one day erupt from the sea and consume all those in its wake. The cult began preparing for that eventuality. The myth of the cult was such that they believed those initially consumed by the massive sea creature would attain a kind of immortality and experience ultimate pleasure. Only those deemed most worthy would experience this ecstasy, and thus elaborate ritual sacrifices were conducted, usually involving humans. A sanctified briny pool was constructed, and captured residents from the nearby Northwich and Yarmouth were chained and cast into the thing in a gross ritual drowning. Interestingly, after a time, a Leviathan spawn took up residence in the room of the pool, consuming sacrificial victims in a spectacular, albeit bloody display. This, of course, seemed to only affirm the cult's legitimacy. Eventually, a much vaunted high priestess named Adira Lacoon, whose haunting beauty and enticing charisma enthralled many to the worship of the thing. The high priestess herself, seemingly enraptured in the tentacles of the beast, and submerged beneath the murky waters of the ritual pool for hours, communing with the beast below. And when she did emerge, she was said to be blessed with knowledge and wisdom from the great beyond. At the behest of the high priestess, the cult was said to have excavated a great labyrinth beneath the bog surrounding the sacrificial pool, with vast passages leading in all directions and deep into the Middle Gloom itself. Eventually, however, the vulgar excesses of the cult and their demand for human sacrifices became too much for the surrounding towns to bear, and the towns of Yarmouth, Northwich, and Nottingcorn combined their forces and moved against the evil cult. In the end, the Leviathan spawn emerged from the pool and joined the battle, but the clerics of Mitra and the magics of several powerful wizards overcame the thing, and in its death throes, the temple and the ritual pool sank beneath the surrounding bog, taking most of the cultists with it, including the high priestess herself. Those agents of chaos not taken to the bog were soon put to the sword. That was not the end of the cult, however. The magics of the Mittergloom allowed the religion and the priestess to survive for a few years more, conducting their foul rituals in secret hidden rooms within the gloomy labyrinthine passages. Travelers along the Northwich Road occasionally disappeared, never to be heard from again. It was a group of adventurers that discovered the hidden temple and informed the nearby towns of the cult's survival. Eventually, the remaining members of the cult were overcome and the religion was destroyed with the death of the cult's charismatic high priestess. The surrounding lords had the passages to the surface caved in and bricked up, and the evil of the place faded to memory and legendary. That is until about 80 years ago when a peat farmer dug a well and inadvertently crashed through the ceiling of a submerged temple room. Indeed, the cult was said to be wealthy off the ill-gotten gains of many wayward travelers who fell victim to their evil rituals. For a time, this attracted many would-be adventurers and treasure hunters seeking the cult's lost wealth. And generally, most adventurers returned empty-handed or failed to return at all. The large well itself sits abandoned and avoided by the locals, but occasionally a group of upstart adventurers will still seek their fortunes in the hidden passages below. The failure of many to return from such forays further cements the foul legends of the place as a cautionary tale. Surrounded by several peat farms and not far from one of the countryside's many windmills, those seeking adventure can easily discover the place by asking around one of the nearby towns or farms. Locals refer to the halls below the bog as simply the Bog Mire, though bards and those with a storytelling bent might refer to the place as the Vaults of the Leviathan. Common dungeon features include doors caked with algae and water damage. The walls have a greenish hue. The place is damp and foul-smelling. The constant echo of dripping water can be heard throughout the halls of the place, along with the occasional skitter of a rat or the legs of some large insects, or perhaps even something more sinister. When speaking to the locals, additional information and rumors might be discovered, as is the way of such things. Much of what is said is only partially true or outright fabrication, and I provided a simple chart for the Dungeon Master to roll on, as is the tradition of such things, rolling a d20. That's a possible rumor, and these things can be asked of those in town or peat farmers or those who might possibly be in the know, and they can discover such things as an adventurer who survived the Bogmire's depths still survives. He goes by the name Old Pete and can be found drinking himself into a stupor in the gutted fish in Yawmouth. Or they might hear that there's a demonic spawn that wanders the place, eating all who dares enter, which probably isn't true. The beautiful priestess Adira Lacoon still survives, ready to enthrall the hearts of those who see her and enslave them. That might be partially true. I'll get to that in a moment. And of course there are others. I'm not going to go over all of them, but obviously you can pause the video if you wanted to read them. All right, let's go ahead and move on to room 1. Egress to this room is gained via the well from above. Iron rungs have been driven into the walls to allow for easy access to this room, and hanging from the final rung is a thick knotted rope that traverses the space from the ceiling to the floor. This oddly shaped room is roughly 40 by 50 feet, and archways are decorated with demon-faced capstones in the center of the east, west, and north walls. The center of this vaulted ceiling room is dominated by a rather gruesome statue, approximately 10 feet tall and almost 8 feet in circumference, rising up from the floor as if emerging from an abyss. This alarmingly lifelike stone edifice is a mass of tentacles, blubbers, tusks, fins, and scales. It is a cruel union of perverse cephalopod, piscine, and walrus forms. In the center of this mass is a giant green glass serpent-like eye. Once there are at least 4 player characters in this room, the eye will begin to luminesce a sickly green and hum in an otherworldly tone. One round later, a glowing green fist-sized ball will emerge and randomly strike one character, and then there's a chart for you to roll on the effects. There's no saving throw, and the effect lasts for 24 hours. So you can also pause the video if you wanted to read over all of these effects, but they're generally there for amusement. There's a benefit and a boon for each, but also something negative as well. For example, the character's lower body and legs mutate into the hind end of a grasshopper. The transformation is painful and takes about 1 minute. Any armor or leggings will rip and tear unless quickly removed. The character can now jump and run an additional 15 feet Inadvertently, when speaking, the character will randomly chirp and sputter like an insect. And of course, -3 to all NPC reactions as the lower half of the person now looks like a giant grasshopper. Kind of gross. So they go on. There's different ones. Character begins retching and throwing up for 1 minute, and their stomach and internal organs mutate. The character now has acid breath thrice per day. The character can breathe a cone of acid 15 foot long and 15 foot wide at the end. Acid breath does 3d6 points of damage, save for half. The character's breath is now unbearable to anyone within 5 feet of them, and they have to make a saving throw or begin retching uncontrollably. And number 8 is probably my favorite, being the most outright juvenile of the various effects. The character becomes extremely flatulent, emitting a foul glowing green gas from their hind area that lingers in a 20-foot radius around them. Anyone in the area of effect must make a saving throw at +2 or begins retching uncontrollably for 1d4 rounds. Afterwards, have the character make a saving throw once per hour or repeat the effect. So that generally happens every time a group enters the room. Each person can only be affected one time, and then essentially once everyone's had a go at this, it doesn't affect them anymore. Moving on to the second room, which leads eastward from the Leviathan room. This is basically a large room covered in frescoes depicting a giant tentacled beast attacking sailing ships, vast armies of cultists of the Leviathan worshipping the beast, as well as conducting sacrificial rituals whereby the unfortunate victim is adorned in scant sacrificial robes, chained, iron weights attached to the ankles, and tossed into a well. Some depictions even show tentacles erupting from said well to entwine the unfortunate soul and drag them into the well, certainly to be consumed alive. At the far end of this room, along the east wall, is a solid stone altar. The stonework here is composed of carved tentacles and a central green glass eye. There are human skulls embedded in the masonry along the base of the thing, as well as facing outwards on the top along the 4 corners. On the altar itself is a stone bowl, and inspection of the bowl's contents will reveal 3 stone tiles about 1 inch square and a 1/4 inch thick. A stylized letter R is carved into each of these tiles, and they will ultimately be needed to solve the riddle on the stone door that leads to level 2. Now, I'm going to take a moment to plug a recently discovered and now favorite channel of mine, Crooked Staff Terrain. That's where I got this puzzle, which you can see here. The tiles are meant to fit in, and it's kind of a crafting project. Crooked Staff has some amazing PDF terrain. If you're familiar with DM Scotty's 2.5D terrain, then you might be familiar with how this is supposed to work. But essentially, you can print out these lovely PDFs of floors and walls, and there's amazing things that the creator, Kristen Richards, has put into his PDFs. Beautiful artwork, and it's definitely worth checking out. A link you'll find in the description. So with that being said, let's go on to the sacrificial well room, which is just north of the Temple of the Leviathan. This circular room is dominated by a central well, the stone lip of the thing, only about 1 foot off the floor. The well itself still contains water, the surface of which is about 1 foot below the lip or level with the floor. It's murky and opaque and 50 feet deep. Like the temple room, the walls here are covered in frescoes depicting more Leviathan cultists performing sacrificial rituals. Characters looking upwards will notice a 6-foot diameter hole in the ceiling about 30 feet from the floor and directly over the well. Now, this is one of those things that obviously that is a trap. And my particular DM style when it comes to traps such as this is I like to show the players the trap. I just say, here's the trap that's going to get you, and then later on I'll get them, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So the bottom of this well is covered in the long decayed corpses of the victim, as well as quite a few adventurers who have been deposited here from the Slime Hall Room 7. There's quite a bit of treasure here, gems, jewelry, and coin totaling at least 1,000 gold pieces, but it would take quite the effort to gather it all. There's also several magic potions determined randomly and a +1 dagger lying along the bottom. In addition, there is a 2-hit die skeleton lying in wait for anyone unlucky enough to find themselves at the bottom of the well. The creature is infused and animated by the malevolent presence of the place and attacks as a 3-hit die monster. The skeleton is also wielding a +1 longsword Underwater attacks are at -2 to hit and damage. However, the skeleton attacks normally. Of course, there's some stats for the skeleton here, but then anyone falling into the well wearing armor will sink to the bottom in 1 round. Characters can remain submerged a number of rounds equal to their constitution score. Afterwards, they will begin to drown, taking 1d6 of temporary damage per round until unconscious. Once a character reaches 0 hit points, they must make a saving throw each round or die. Temporary hit point damage recovers at 1 point per hour of rest. It takes a minimum of 1d6 plus 2 rounds to remove enough armor pieces to swim to the top. A character cannot both fight and remove armor in the same round. So those are my little notes in regard to how I would run this encounter. So let's move on to room 4, the slime room. This was once part of the temple's defense when it was active, with flaming oil sprayed by a large bellows embedded in the wall through 6 nozzles in a circular pattern around the room. Activated by a 5-foot square concealed pressure plate in the center of the room's floor, it can easily be bypassed by those in the know by simply walking around it. The nozzles are obvious and can be spotted easily and are about 4 feet off the floor. The pressure plate can be spotted if looking, with a 3 in 6 chance. The flaming oil trap has long since decayed to failure. However, the pressure plate and bellows are still technically operational. In addition, the oil has become contaminated by a healthy green slime colony, thus anyone standing anywhere in this room when the pressure plate is activated will be sprayed with a significant amount of green slime unless a saving throw is made. Characters wearing metal armor who fail their saving throw can remove the contaminated pieces in 1d6 rounds. The slime will eat through metal armor in 1d6 rounds and leather armor in 1d4 rounds. Characters unable to get their armor off in time will turn into green slime in 1d6 rounds unless the contaminated areas are put to the flame, causing 1d8 fire damage, or a cure disease spell is cast. Characters walking through this room carelessly have a 2 in 6 chance of bumbling over the pressure plate. So there's just a little trap of caution. And here we go. Let's go into room 5. This is Crypts and Catacombs. This large room reeks of decay and fragrance of death. The rough-hewn stone walls, floor, and ceiling are characterized by the many skulls embedded in the 3 dominant pillars in the center of the room and piled in triangular patterns in the corners. There are 8 alcoves, 4 on the east and 4 on the west walls, in which there are 3 sets of stacked stone shelves, 3 to a wall that contain the remains of fallen cultists of the Leviathan. All along the floor are scattered bones, femurs, skulls, finger bones, and even desiccated whole legs and arms still barely held together by decaying sinew. 2 rounds after a party has entered this section, or when they are about halfway across the room, 1d8 of the alcoves will activate 1d4 skeletons each that will emerge to attack interlopers. Many of the skeletons still wear the frayed remains of the robes they wore in life, characterized by the tentacled effigy with a large central eye in the chest area. Characters who think to don these frayed robes will discover that they will not be subject to attack by the skeletons. And of course, there's a secret door on the northwest alcove that leads to a hallway section beyond. And then we'll get to 1-6, which is the slanting passage. Now, this is kind of fun. This exit passage from room 5 begins a very gradual and subtle downgrade as soon as it is entered. The floor is composed of a beautiful, highly polished black marble with a white etching pattern. It's extremely smooth, and at the dotted line on the map is covered in a oily clear slime. The slime itself is harmless, but walking on the floor is very difficult. Anyone falling requires a dexterity check, roll their dexterity score or less, and they begin to slide eastward down the hall, and anyone that fails a regular saving throw will then gain enough momentum to slide all the way to the hole at the far end of the hallway, and that is the hole that they saw in the ceiling room in room 3. At this point, have the character make an additional saving throw, if they wish, to avoid falling into the well. If they make the saving throw, they take 3d6 falling damage as they impact the stone floor. Anyone rolling a 1 on their save actually impacts the lip of the well for 3d6 points and then falls into the well. At the area marked A on the map, there is a bricked off alcove that leads to room 7. Anyone within 10 feet of this area will notice that several of the bricks have been knocked free, and that seems to lead to an area beyond. And then we get to room 7, which is essentially the boss fight of this particular section of the dungeon, which is the revered priestess's burial chamber. This is the final resting place of one of the cult's high priestesses, Adira Lacoon. A green encrusted bronze plaque bears the following inscription: "Here lies the beloved high priestess Adira Lacoon. May her spirit entwine with him." The center of the east wall has a small alcove in which resides Adira's stone sarcophagus. Like the altar from room 2, there is a carved tentacle effigy dominated by a large central eye on the sides. On the lid is a stunningly lifelike sculpture of the priestess herself, lying in state, arms crossed. The sculptor was clearly of some skill, as the thin burial shroud she's wearing almost seems translucent and slightly revealing against the stone effigy's shapely form. A combined strength score of 26 is required to lift the lid off the sarcophagus and reveal its contents. The corpse within has not fared nearly as well as her stone effigy on the lid, however. The cotton garment she wore in death, frayed and crumbling, dried skin clings to bony fingers, Adira's beauty lost to time and only preserved by the skill of an unknown sculptor. Adira's bony fingers still clasp her mace +1, and the emerald-encrusted gold amulet around her neck is worth 1,000 gold pieces and will surely be worth taking back to the market. At her side is a 5-foot-long, tentacle-shaped staff of beguiling. Foes within a 20-foot range must make a saving throw or consider the holder to be a loyal friend for 4d4 rounds, and the staff has 26 charges remaining. On the east wall is a murky, no longer functioning mermaid fountain. The fountain is 3 foot deep, and the bones of 4 complete corpses can be found within. There is no treasure here. If anyone touches Adira's mace or her staff, she will immediately animate as a white, and the corpses in the fountain will emerge the following round as 2 hit die skeletons. On the first round, Adira will attempt to use her staff to beguile everyone in the room. Those who make their saving throws will be attacked by Adira, and she'll use her +1 mace, and the skeletons will attack the following round. This act will give beguiled characters an additional saving throw. Beguiled characters will view anything Adira does in the best light. Other fighting PCs will be viewed as the aggressors. Allies may not necessarily attack, but they will ask their friends to surrender and so forth. Also, affected characters will see the undead priestess as she was in life, beautiful with long raven hair, ruby lips, svelte figure, and such. Of course, this illusion is broken as soon as they make their saving throw or the effect ends, which could lead to some amusing role-playing. The corpses of the defeated are thrown into the mermaid fountain to rise as undead wights or skeletons in the future, and Adira's corpse will return to her rest, the lid sealing of its own volition, ready to fight off future interlopers. And that's what I've got so far. Those are the first 7 rooms of the dungeon. Of course, I'll be providing more information here in the future. I hope you found this fun and interesting. Please make sure you check out Crooked Staff Terrain and check out all of Kristen Richards' amazing creations. And thank you all so much for watching the video. I hope you had a great holiday season, and I'd like to thank all my supporters who make this channel possible. You've made my year, and greater things are coming up in 2023. I've got a whole slew of new content coming your way. My daughter Crystal has agreed to help me with the artwork for my own YouTube motion comic, Old School Stories, where I relate hilarious, often told stories around my table from 40 years of gaming. Please give this video a like, comment, and share. Please check out my Teespring store for great gaming swag, t-shirts, carry bags, coffee cups, and more. Join the channel's Facebook page, RPG Retro Reviews, and consider supporting the channel by becoming a patron yourself. Or alternatively, you can just send a tip through the PayPal tip jar. A link is in the description. As always, my friends, may your D20 roll true and game on.